What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Joining me again from Chicago, Chris Fedor, and this time, Chris, we have a new historic moment, right? This is a team that is now 12-0, the 8th team in NBA history to eclipse this feat. They are also just one win away from tying their best winning streak in franchise history. Chris, I know you're in Chicago. I know you got to see this rather ugly game from the Cavs. What did you take away initially?
Well, I took away initially, Ethan, that I got a follow from the great Jerry Ferrara tonight. So I'm on cloud nine right now. Turtle from Entourage is currently following me on Twitter, and he retweeted something that I posted during the game. So what was your question again?
What did you like about the Chicago Bulls Cavs game that saw them get to 12-0?
I just think it shows the depth of this team. I think it shows the selflessness of this team, and I think it encapsulates, in a way, it just encapsulates why they're 12-0. At a time when Darius Garland was on the bench because he just wasn't as effective, he wasn't playing up to his standards. At a time that Donovan Mitchell was on the bench, and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and Isaac Okoro, the entire starting lineup, was on the bench. Kenny Atkinson put his trust and his faith in the second unit, just like he promised he was going to do when he took this job. And they delivered. They finished the third quarter on a 19-9 run. They flipped the game. They provided the jolt that was required. They allowed the starters to get some extended rest so that they could be ready to close out the game in the fourth quarter. So I just feel like tonight's game showed it all. It showed the depth of this team. It showed the guts of Kenny Atkinson. It showed the brilliance of Donovan Mitchell. It showed their ability to win a bunch of different ways, their ability to adjust on the fly. Kenny Atkinson went 2-3 zone. Kenny Atkinson went switch everything. Kenny Atkinson went traps on Zach LaVine and Kobe White at various points. So I thought, as Donovan Mitchell said after the game, through the first 12 games, they're not winning the same way every night. And that is a positive thing for them, that they're learning how to win a variety of different ways, and they have a bunch of different ways that they believe they can win these games, and they have a bunch of different methods that they can use throughout the course of a game, throughout the course of a playoff series when thinking big picture. And all of that stuff, it may not seem like as big of a deal right now because it's only November and there's still a long way to go in this regular season, but that stuff matters when you get to April, May, and June.
Chris, speaking of post-game interviews, Kenny Atkinson keeps saying that he doesn't know the records that the Cavs are breaking, right? Like, sure, that could be coach speak, but we know him to be a very candid person, right? Like, if he, honestly says that, he was, after tonight's game, he was like, oh, wow, I didn't know we were the 8th team in franchise history to do this, or NBA history to do this. But for me, it's like, that may be in the back of their minds, right? Darius Garland talked about it against the Brooklyn Nets. Kenny Atkinson said it after the game against the Brooklyn Nets about they know they're undefeated. They don't want the streak to end, but it also means that they are literally just working game by game, and that's what's special. You keep saying, they are winning in different ways. They don't do that if they don't scrap the plan that they had from the previous game and enter with a completely new game plan, new mindset, right? Obviously, this is a great example. The Brooklyn Nets are one of the slowest playing teams in the NBA, right? And then you switch and you come and play against the Chicago Bulls, who were literally entering this game as the highest team in pace for the NBA season, right? And at the beginning of the game, it was a shootout. Donovan Mitchell was going bar for bar, as the kids say, with the other players. And obviously Zach LaVine being back, Kobe White being back. These guys were making their impact. But again, when it gets to the bench, when it gets to the later times of the game, the Cavs are able to put it into a little neutral or put it in reverse and do the parallel parking in game situations. And as Kenny Atkinson said earlier on into the season, they are letting the game dictate the pace that they have to play.
And the other thing, Ethan, it just doesn't matter if some of these guys, some of these most important players for the Cavs, are not playing to their standard. There's other guys that are capable of stepping up and filling that. If you would to sit there and say, what's the formula for the Cavs to potentially lose a game during this stretch and end their streak? Part of the formula showed up tonight. Darius Garland did not play to his standards. Jared Allen didn't have it. It looked like he was mentally and physically exhausted. He was getting pushed around by Vucevic. Chicago was hitting everything. The Cavs had no answers for how to guard them. That's why they tried so many different methods throughout the course of the game. Chicago shot about 50% from the field and about 37% from three-point range. That was kind of the blueprint, right? That was unfolding in front of you. And yet, on a night that Darius doesn't have it, Donovan goes back into superstar Donovan mode. And I spent basically the entire morning talking to Donovan for a bigger story that I'm working on right now. And it's about him empowering his teammates. And it's about him understanding that the next step forward for him requires a step back. Because it's not about Donovan Mitchell. It's about Evan Mobley. It's about Darius Garland. It's about Karis LeVert. It's about Ty Jerome. It's about the collective of this team. That's how they're going to win a championship, if they are going to win a championship. And Donovan understands that. And I think what happened in the Boston series in the Eastern Conference semifinals really resonated with him, especially the way that Evan Mobley played. Like, that was an eye-opener to Donovan of, this guy can be the man. Like, this guy can be the dog of this team. This guy can take pressure off of me. This guy can make life easier on me. And we've talked about it on this podcast a number of different times. Everything when it comes to Evan Mobley within this organization is intentional. And the number of minutes that Donovan is playing with Evan Mobley, that's intentional. The number of times that Donovan works out alongside Evan Mobley, that's intentional. Like, everything is about Donovan Mitchell, one of the best players in the NBA, a legitimate MVP candidate, taking a step back to empower Evan Mobley. And, part of this reminds me of what happened when LeBron went to Miami. That was Dwayne Wade's team. That was his franchise. It was always going to be because of what he had accomplished while he was there. But for Miami to be the team that it needed to be, Dwayne Wade had to take a step back. Dwayne Wade had to empower LeBron in a different kind of way and basically give him the platform and check his ego and be selfless and say, I get it. I'm going to have the statue. I've had all these things that I've accomplished, both from an individual and a team perspective, but this is a different kind of team. This is a different kind of makeup, and we need you to be Mr. Miami. And I feel like Donovan has done that with Evan. So we had this long conversation throughout the course of the morning, but at the end of that conversation, Donovan said something, and I thought about it all first quarter. I thought about it all first half. At the end of the conversation, Donovan said, there are going to be moments, whether it's in a game or it's for stretches this season, where I just have to do what I'm getting paid to do, where I have to score the bucket because I'm one of the best pure scorers in the NBA. And he recognized early that Jared Allen did not have it. He recognized early that Darius Garland's shots were coming up short and he didn't have his legs. And he's like, you know what? I've got to put my imprint on this game in this kind of way. And I think the maturation that we've seen from Donovan Mitchell in the understanding about how to best make his mark for a team on a nightly basis. And it's not the same every single night, but how to best make his mark on this team on a nightly basis really resonates with me. And I think it's resonating with his teammates as well. It just so happens that tonight called for him to set the tone and finish the game on a night that, two of the most important Cavs just were not playing to their standard. But even though they weren't playing to their standard, the Cavs still had enough to beat a really, really game Chicago team.
And Chris, like, this is the second game that Donovan Mitchell has came out hot. And I think that is by design, right? If I can get this team a lead, if I can get this team going early on, I can then take a back seat and then, if need be, come back when needed, right? Talking about getting off to a hot start. Donovan Mitchell had 25 points in the first half. That was the most he's scored in a first half for this entire season. Small sample size, 12 games. But he ended with 36 points. And I know we talked about Donovan Mitchell helping close out this game. Obviously, his 10 points were huge. But in the fourth quarter, he shot just 3 of 8 from the field. And Darius Garland, the guy who we talked about, who Kenny Atkinson talked about after the game, not having his legs, was like, okay, it's showtime. It's money time, as Kenny Atkinson said. I need to turn it back on. I don't care how tired I am. I don't care if I don't have my legs for the first 3 quarters. This is when I show who I am. It's not what he was able to do last year, but it's something that he's taken over in this season.
Donovan told him to go. Like, Donovan signaled him in those moments, go. You've got the advantageous matchup, attack and finish. And he did.
And he obviously didn't have a whole lot of points, but when he was able to score, it was in big moments. He was 2 of 3 with 4 points, and Ty Jerome talked about it after the game. He had that big scoop layup that kind of sealed the game. It was the icing of the game. He kind of celebrated on the ground, and I don't know, Chris, if you saw this on the Jumbotron, but he left a fan that was sitting next to him hanging. Unfortunate for that guy, but Darius Garland, as we know, can be locked in, and if he's not in his home arena, fans be damned. But I think for me, Chris, it's not about the all-star guys who have played to an all-star caliber this season. And you mentioned it when we started. It is the bench, right? I wrote an article after the Brooklyn Nets game. Ty Jerome, new nickname, the microwave, right? Tristan Thompson, Don, the nickname. I know for people listening and watching this, Vinny Johnson. I get it. I seen your emails. I got the text. I get it. It is not a new nickname, but that is the nickname that has been bestowed to Ty Jerome. I didn't give it to him. Tristan Thompson did. Blame him. Right. But it is not only because of how quickly he can impact games when he steps onto the floor or how quick he gets hot. It's about how he can impact the entire team. Assists, scoring. And that's not even Ty Jerome alone, right? We understand that the entire bench unit was playing in a role that we had never seen them in this season, right? And Karis LeVert, George Niang, for everybody that tried to kick him off the team this offseason, Ty Jerome, all had 12 points. And they were big points to swing a game that a lot of people that were online and watching the game as I were like, this could be the end. And I talked about this Chicago Bulls team on the podcast yesterday. I talked about it on the radio today with 92.3 The Fan and your friends over there, Chris. If the Cavs were able to beat the Chicago Bulls, their 12th game in 20 games, or their 12th game in 20 days, it is an advantageous setup for them to go 15-0 until they meet up with the Boston Celtics for their 16th game of the season.
Yeah. Look, when you talk about this situation that they're in right now, everybody in that locker room knows the number 24. They know that that's the streak by the Warriors. Now, they're not pulling out a schedule or a calendar and sitting there saying, okay, if we beat this team, then we have to beat... No, they're not doing that. But the truth is, these are the kinds of ones that should be favorable for a team like the Cavs. And then they just have to find a way against the top tier teams. Boston twice, Denver, Miami's in that mix, and Miami's always very difficult. But I think the thing that we have seen, Ethan, through this, even though there are some lesser opponents on this schedule mixed in here. The Cavs are going to get everybody's best shot. And everybody wants to be the team, even if they're not a good team. And I don't think Chicago's very good. I don't think Brooklyn's very good. Even if they're not a good team, there's going to be a different level of motivation than what usually exists in November when the Cavs are playing against these teams. Everyone that they're playing against knows that the Cavs are undefeated at the time, and everybody wants to be the team that ends that. So that's the thing that you kind of saw from the Bulls tonight, besides the fact that we talked about it on the previous podcast about like how difficult stylistically the Bulls can be. And if they have it clicking offensively like they did tonight, they can certainly provide problems and they can hang around. 17 lead changes and 15 ties, right? But you could tell that there was extra juice inside the United Center, and there was extra juice coming from the Bulls because they had a chance to be a part of history. Like every team that plays against the Cavs has an opportunity to be a part of history. Are they going to be on the wrong side or are they going to be on the right side? They're going to try and be on the right side. So they're going to get everybody's best shot. And at the end of the day, Ethan, these are NBA teams. These are NBA players. And a bad night for the Cavs and a great night for the opponent could lead to a bad result for the Cavs, despite the fact that, if we're thinking about this as logically as possible, Boston and Denver are the two that you circle on the schedule saying they pose the biggest threat.
And for those, I mentioned this early on to the podcast, for those solely interested in Cavs franchise history, they're one win away from tying their best streak in all of the Cavs franchise history, not just to start a season, but for an entirety, right? And the other thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap this up, right, is the Cavs were getting some, I even texted our subtexters, their defense was a little wonky when it comes to the transition offense of the Chicago Bulls, all those different things. It's not to say that the Cavs weren't forcing turnovers, right? The Cavs forced 21 total turnovers while giving up just 9 of their own. And when you talk about the point of attack defense from guys that have been talked about a lot that aren't primary defensive players, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Ty Jerome, they combined for 11 steals. Just those 3 guys. Donovan and Darius themselves had 4 of those. And that is a testament to what this Cavs defense overall can be with how they operate, switching, being able to read passing lanes, the IQ of these players, and then just the dog and the mentality to show up that they are not just offensive players. Ty Jerome talked about it after the game. He is taking pride on that side of the floor because he's heard that people have said that he's not a defensive player. Donovan Mitchell, I asked him about it when we were in Cleveland after the Brooklyn Nets game. He's like, yeah, sure. He's not. That's a fair statement. He's not known for his defense, but he's still going to bring that energy on that floor. And when you talk about energy, when you talk about how this team thrives, and you see it when Darius Garland getting a technical foul for celebrating with his teammates, not the best move by Darius to be mentioned, but Ty Jerome bringing energy to that end of the floor. We talk about the 2 possessions back-to-back that he got in Brooklyn, then the 3 steals that he got against the Chicago Bulls tonight. It is a huge testament to what he thinks can uplift this team. Not only hounding defenders, but also creating offense for everybody on the floor and mismatching those different things.
I talked to Ty after the game while he was still icing his ankles and his shoulder. And I just asked him, I said, how do you define your role? Tristan Thompson gave you a nickname. Kenny Atkinson has talked about the impact that you have and what you mean to this team and what you've meant to this fast start. I said, how do you define your role? What do you view it as? And he said, I try to fill in the gaps. He said one of the things that he loves about his role is that he has an opportunity to see the game. So he watches the game in the first quarter, and he sits next to one of the Cavs assistant coaches, Mike Garrity, who just happened to be a college point guard. He was a very successful college point guard. He played at USC. And he was also, early on in his career, the Cavs player development coach who played a big part in Darius Garland becoming this, and played a big part in Colin Sexton becoming a piece that Utah wanted to trade for in the Donovan Mitchell deal. So Mike Garrity was a player development ace, and then he started to coach the Charge because he wanted to take the next step in his career. And now he's on the front of the bench with Kenny Atkinson, and he's become a big asset to Kenny, and he's become a big asset to Ty Jerome. So they have these conversations as the first quarter is going on about, okay, when you get in here, like, here are the things that you can focus on. Here are the things where we're coming up short as a team, or you can be effective for us. And Ty said he learned this year for the first time in his career, let's read the game in the first quarter, let's watch it, and then try and fill in the gaps as soon as I get in the game. What is it that we're lacking? What is it that we're missing? Do we need my playmaking? Do we need my shooting? Do we need my floor spacing? Do we need my floor generalship? Do we need my defense? Like, what is it that we need? And that's how Ty is approaching his role. And I think that's a really, really smart way to look at it. And I think the results speak for themselves. He played 21 minutes tonight, Ethan, and he was a plus 21. And you can sit there and you can always say, well, numbers are going to tell you part of the story, but not the entire story. Like, this is a case to me where the plus 21 speaks to the impact that Ty Jerome made. He changed the game. He completely changed the game the minute that he went in there. He was integral in them winning this game and them finishing the third quarter on a 19-9 run. The other person that I think we have to point out, because this is allowing the Cavs to match up better with these teams that want to go 5 out. And there are teams that are going to want to go 5 out against the Cavs because they don't want to see Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley on the floor together. And the best way to do that is to downsize your lineup and go 5 out. And it has shown in these first few weeks that the Cavs have a problem with 5 out when they played Jarrett and Evan together. And it was a problem tonight against Chicago. You know, Jarrett couldn't defend on the perimeter. He couldn't make the kind of impact that he's used to making. Dean Wade's ability to play center, something that, you know, JB Bickerstaff last year dabbled with, and something that Kenny Atkinson is continuing to experiment with. Like a mad scientist, he continues to experiment with these different lineups and combinations. Dean Wade's ability to play center in these lineups and be effective playing center. 2 blocks, by the way. Protecting the rim. Dean Wade as a rim protector. Not Evan Mobley. Not Jarrett Allen. Dean Wade as a rim protector. The last line of defense. For him to be able to play that role and the team have success while he's playing that role, that just gives them a different way to play. And it allows them to not use Evan Mobley solely as the lone backup center. You know, we talked about it all offseason, Ethan. Who's going to be the third big on this team? Do the Cavs need to go out in free agency and find a third big? In case Jarrett Allen's in foul trouble, in case he's hurt, in case something happens throughout the course of the year. When teams downsize and they go to 5 out, the Cavs have a third big. And it's Dean Wade. And he has shown a level of effectiveness in that particular role that, I mean, it's found money for the Cavs, to be honest with you. Because I was wondering how the Cavs were going to be able to counter that. And I was wondering if their only counter was going to be, all right, we just got to put Evan at the 5, and we got to run him into the ground, and we got to play him 36 to 40 minutes. Well, they don't have to because of Dean. So shout out to him for taking that challenge, accepting that responsibility, and finding a way to put his imprint on the game way out of his normal position. I even said to him tonight, I said, am I starting to call you a center now? And he was like, 2 blocks, 2 blocks. He did. He had 2 blocks, and they came at a really critical point in the game, and it kind of deterred Chicago from thinking that they could drive to the basket and score just because Dean was playing center and just because Jared Allen and Evan Mobley were off the floor. That's a big deal for the Cavs moving forward. It really is.
Chris, you talked about Kenny being a mad scientist, right? And obviously, when you're a mad scientist, you need to experiment before you go into something full blown, right?
Mm.
And in the Brooklyn Nets game, Kenny went to Dean Wade instead of Jared Allen as the 5-man for 2 minutes to give Evan Mobley a little bit of a rest because Evan Mobley was tired and he knew he was going to need him to close the game out against the Brooklyn Nets, who were going to attack the paint at a different level than the Chicago Bulls. So, in those 2 minutes, did Dean Wade hold up as well as he did against the Chicago Bulls? No. But it gave an opportunity. It gave it gave a chance to see what it would look like in that lineup. And then against the Brooklyn Nets, and then against the Chicago Bulls, Kenny was able to go to that for an extended period, probably longer than he might have even thought of, because if you think about it, he was probably thinking, okay, that 2-minute stretch was half decent. Let's go 2 minutes again. Oh, this is working. I'm not going to go away from it. Again, talking about Kenny Atkinson's in-game adjustments that he's been able to make, right? We harped on this when it comes to J.B. Bickerstaff last year and in the previous years. And if he was going to be able to make in-game adjustments, how much better this team could be. We're seeing that come to fruition with Kenny Atkinson. And Chris, the last question I want to ask you before we get out of here, and it's coming more so from our subtexters than from me. What is the status of Jared Allen? Is he still healthy? Is he still 100%? Is he hurt? Because not just because he's played to a lower standard than he has in the past, the last 2 games, but he seemed to be hobbling a little bit at certain times throughout the game.
I saw him after the game. I talked to him briefly. He looked fine. He was walking fine. He said that he was good to go. So, I haven't seen anything that is overly alarming. Let's put it that way. I know that people want to look at these players sometimes and say, you're getting paid millions of dollars. You'll just suck it up and be at your best every single night. But I just don't think that's reality. This has been a really, really difficult schedule to start the year. And it's not because of the opponents that they've played. It's because of how condensed this schedule is. They haven't had 2 games off in between games at all. At all. It's either been every other day or it's been a back-to-back. It's been 3 games in 4 nights. It's been, you don't want to complain all that much because you know that the schedule is going to even itself out. And there are other breaks that the Cavs have gotten along the way in these first 12 games. But the level of condensed to this schedule, I think it's wearing on players. I think it's wearing on Kenny Atkinson, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's wearing on me. It's just hard. It's been a grind to get through this point. And, there have been games, Ethan, where they've blown out teams and they've been able to rest their guys in the fourth quarter and they've been able to steal time on the bench. But these other games are really, really competitive. They're very, very intense. Think about the 2 Milwaukee games, tonight against Chicago, the other night against Brooklyn. So these things are wearing on the Cavs mentally and physically. And I think part of what you're seeing with, some of these off nights or guys not playing to their standard, I'll continue to monitor the Jarrett thing and continue to see if he is indeed 100%. I know Sam Merrill was feeling it in his ankle a little bit, especially earlier today in shoot-around. I saw him having a conversation with multiple members of the training staff. But I think just generally speaking, These guys are feeling it. Like the Cavs are doing different things when it comes to optional shoot-arounds, when it comes to recovery days instead of practice. They're doing different things that they normally wouldn't do in the past, or what Kenny Atkinson would prefer to do early on in the season, because that's what's being required to recover from these games and manage the grueling nature of this early season schedule to this point. But
And
like I
Chris,
said, I will keep an eye on the Jarrett thing and make sure that there isn't anything else going on there. But I haven't heard of anything else going on there, and I didn't see any signs of anything else going on there with Jarrett.
for sure. And Chris, you mentioned the condensed schedule, right? And we talked about that earlier into the season. 12 games in 20 days to start the
I mean, that's
season.
ridiculous. That's wild to think about that.
It's insane. And even crazier is in the first 40 games of the season, the Cavs have 2 games where they're listed as going to have more rest going in than the opposing team. Could you
Mm-hmm.
guess which week that those 2 games are going to come in?
More rest than the opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of them's right around Thanksgiving
Mm-hmm.
because they got that funky break in the schedule, right?
Yeah,
What is
but
that, like November 24th to the 27th or something like that?
it's actually this week, both against Philadelphia and against the Hornets. Philly's
Oh, there you
coming off a back to back, and the Hornets, I believe, are doing the same on Sunday, right?
go.
So this is a prime opportunity, and I know people are like 15-0. That sounds like a stretch. They're gonna play Philly. They're gonna play the Hornets, who are
Mm-hmm.
good. They're gonna play the Bulls again. Sure, all of those things are true. Philly, back to
Except for the
back.
Hornets being good. I don't think that's true.
Well, some people might
I
think
think it's
we're
a bit of, let's just say, I think it's a bit of a mirage that they're sitting in the postseason spot right now.
maybe, but playing against the Philadelphia 76ers, everybody's always usually coming into a season has those games circled for the Cavs. But with Joel Embiid supposed to come back from an injury, and it's going to be a back to back, I think, after his first game back, the
Mm-hmm.
likelihood of him playing seems bleak. And then Paul George also coming back from an injury, whether or not they put him on a minutes restriction or anything of that nature in the second night of a back to back is interesting as well. And those are the biggest things, right? Then you talk about being at home against the Bulls, against the Hornets, and then going to Boston to play in the 16th game. That's why, if you think that I might sound overzealous about the 15-0, it's not because of the teams they're playing, it's because of the situations that they're in going into these games. They're going to have more rest than they're used to having throughout this 12-win stretch, which, again, 8th best in NBA history. And 2, they are going to be playing teams that might not be at 100% either.
Yeah, you're right about that. And that gives them a little bit more time in terms of recovery, and that gives them a little bit more in terms of an advantageous stretch here. They've just got to continue to manage it the right way. Like I said, they're doing different kinds of things. Instead of a practice, they're doing recovery days. Instead of full on shoot around, team organized shoot around, they're doing optional shoot arounds where maybe like 6 guys are showing up to the arena on game days and the other ones are determining that it's better for them in terms of their performance on the night, to have fresh legs and to stay off their legs. So it's just an interesting situation that the Cavs continue to monitor. And rounding this up and going back to the beginning of this conversation, that's why depth is so important. That's why Kenny Atkinson, one of the first things that he said when he took over this job is, I'm going to celebrate depth. It wasn't just coach speak. It wasn't just saying things that were different from the previous regime. He has stayed true to that. And tonight, you don't want to overblow what tonight was, but it was their next opportunity to stay undefeated. And they're down 9 in the third quarter. How many coaches go to a full-on bench group in that situation? I don't know. Like when Darius came out and Donovan was out, I looked at somebody next to me and I said, wait, huh? They're out of the game at the same time? Like they're both sitting on the bench? Like this is happening right now? And I looked on the court and I was like, bench player, bench player, bench player. Oh my God, it's the 5 bench group. How is this going to go? Let's find out. And then they finished the quarter on a 19-9 run. Like that took stones, man. But I think it goes back to Kenny saying that I'm going to trust this group. I'm going to celebrate the depth. And I think empower is a term that has been used a lot over the last couple of months by members of this organization. Front office people are talking about it. Kenny Atkinson has used it. Donovan Mitchell has been using that term. And I think Kenny, in some ways, he has empowered some of these guys off the bench. George Niang, Dean Wade, Ty Jerome, Karis LeVert, Sam Merrill. These guys aren't looking over their shoulder. These guys aren't thinking to themselves, like, yo, if I miss 5 shots in a row, I'm getting yanked and I'm probably not playing for another week. You know what I'm saying? And I think him empowering all these different guys is also giving them confidence. And you see George Niang playing with a different level of confidence. That's just true. You see it, right? You see Sam Merrill not feeling like, oh my God, every shot's got to go in, and the amount of pressure that comes with that. And you see, Karis LeVert playing free, not overthinking. And I just think it's a really good situation to be in. And I think it's very, very smart that Kenny is handling it the way that he is, especially given the complications of this schedule with 12 games in 20 days.
And Chris, I want to end on 2 notes talking about what you just mentioned, right? Sam Merrill is a guy, you talked about the injuries, we talked about preseason where he was coming off an injury, right? He wasn't able to play in either all or majority of the preseason games, I believe. And there was no hesitation from Kenny Atkinson. Like, I already know enough about Sam Merrill. I already have enough information. I'm going to be able to play him and have the confidence to do that. And you talk about that instillment. But I talked to Sam Merrill earlier into the season, especially after the game before the Bucks game when they had Donovan Mitchell hit his game winner, right? Sam Merrill told to me, and I'm just gonna quote this, right? Because this is just it's the authenticity of this team, right? This was after the Orlando Magic game where I believe Sam was just 2 of 3 from deep. He only took 3 3-pointers, right? He said, tonight, I didn't take a shot in my first run. Last year, I probably wouldn't have gone back in. So it's like I'm not out there trying to force things as much, just trying to let the game come to me. Like, that's a different level of mindset. Like, to be able to know and to be told, right? Kenny Atkinson also said this to us. Sam Merrill's not playing because he can shoot the basketball. Sure, that's great, but he's good on defense. What coach in the NBA have you heard say that? And if you say anybody, that's incorrect, right? And I talked to Sam again, talking about like how his expectation on defense changed. And he was like, "Well, when I play for a coach, he probably gets a better understanding of I can play defense." That's the same thing with Karis LeVert's growth on that end. Same thing with Ty Jerome, right? Not an expectation, but the growth is there. And then the last thing I want to say before I wrap this up, Evan Mobley has been so much more violent at the rim. He had, I believe it was 5 of his offensive rebounds, or 5 of his 11 rebounds at the offensive end. He was dunking on people. He's been dunking on people all year. And to quote our friend Spencer Davies with Cavs on SI, he's added some nasty to his game, right? And that has been something that we talked about since the offseason, the aggressiveness, all these different things, even going back to what Kevin Garnett said in his podcast, he needs to add a little bit more meaner, to quote Kevin Garnett, into his game. And that's what he's done. He's been mismatch hunting instead of being hunted. And that's the difference of Evan Mobley's game. And Darius Garland has said it and will continue to say it. We are no longer hunting. We are the hunted. That is, everybody has a target on our back and is trying to give them their first loss. The next team to get that chance, the 76ers in Philly on Wednesday. But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. We're going to have another Hey Chris episode at sometime this week, so send in your questions. But the only way you can do that is if you sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.